It arrived in a black envelope, thick as a grudge and twice as cold. Silver script glinted across the front like a smirk from the past. The Westbrooks Family Annual Reunion. Hosted at the Orlane Grand, San Diego's premier luxury resort. I stared at it for a long time, the way you might look at a photograph of people who smiled at you right before they shut the door in your face. My name is Elena Westbrook, though most people these days know me as E. We're a name I chose the day I stopped waiting for anyone in my family to take me seriously. 15 years ago, I was the disappointment of the Westbrook dynasty. The dreamer. The impractical one. The girl who turned down a position at Westbrook Capital, our family firm, to pursue a degree in hospitality management. My uncle laughed out loud at the graduation dinner. My father said I'd grow out of it once I learned how real life works. And my cousin Meredith, she just asked if I'd be wearing a maid uniform full-time or only part-time. Now here I was, holding an invitation to a reunion they never thought I'd be invited to, except this time they didn't realize I'd be waiting for them, not at the entrance, but at the top. Because the Orlane Grand? That 5-star coastal paradise they'd all be flaunting their wealth in, sipping champagne and name-dropping senators? I built it, I own it, and they don't even know. They think I'm still that girl who checked in guests at a roadside motel, the one they cropped out of family photos and sat at the kids' table until her mid-20s. They think I'm small, invisible, forgettable. But this year, they booked a reunion at my flagship resort, and every detail, every plate, every flower, every keycard runs through me. So no, I wasn't offended by the invitation. I was preparing a welcome they'd never forget. I hadn't heard from anyone in the Westbrook family in years, not unless they needed something. Not since I chose to build a life that didn't require their name or their approval. Back then, walking away from Westbrook Capital was considered nothing short of betrayal. My father, Douglas Westbrook Sr., a man whose voice always filled the room before his presence did, called my decision reckless. He stood at the head of the dining room table and asked, in front of everyone, if I planned to make a living cleaning toilets. His words drew half-hearted chuckles from some cousins and a nervous sip of wine from my mother, who never found the courage to challenge him. They had a plan for me: finish my business degree, slide neatly into a role at the firm, marry well, attend galas, and remain pleasant. But I had a different vision that began the day I spent a summer internship shadowing the front desk manager at a seaside inn in Mendocino. There was something intimate and powerful about hospitality, about creating spaces that gave strangers comfort and dignity. It was the first time in my life I felt like I was actually building something not inherited, not gifted, but earned. So I declined their offer and moved to Portland to study hotel management. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment with a leaking sink and worked evenings at a small boutique inn to make rent. I folded towels, scrubbed baseboards, served continental breakfast, and learned the rhythms of running a property not from spreadsheets, but from mop handles and linen carts. When I opened my first hotel, 5 years later, a modest 10-room hideaway called the Violet Lantern, tucked into a quiet corner of Santa Barbara, no one in the family noticed. Or if they did, they dismissed it as a phase. But I didn't stop. 1 hotel became 3. Then 6. I studied sustainability, digital booking innovations, scent branding, and every detail that created not just a place to sleep, but an experience that whispered elegance without ever shouting it. I reinvested every dollar, ignored the noise, and when other boutique chains began reaching out for acquisition deals, I declined. Because I knew I wasn't building a company for exit, I was building a legacy. Now at 37, I owned E. Warren Hospitality, a portfolio of 21 luxury resorts spanning 5 countries. The Orlane Grand, where this reunion was to be held, wasn't just one of my properties, it was my personal flagship. A fusion of oceanfront minimalism and next-gen tech that had quietly redefined what 5-star meant in the post-pandemic travel era. And yet, Meredith had called me last week, chirping with faux excitement about how exclusive the reunion would be and reminding me to dress appropriately because there would be public figures in attendance. She made it sound like an award show, not a family gathering. And when she bragged that she pulled strings to book the Orlane, claiming the owner was difficult to reach, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. She had no idea she'd booked it through our own corporate concierge system at an elevated rate, no less, which I had personally approved. When she gushed about how lucky they were to land the reservation, I nodded, letting her enjoy the illusion of influence. What she didn't realize was that every floral arrangement, every light fixture, every menu item they'd encounter that night had passed through my hands. I wasn't just invited to the reunion, I was the architect of their experience, and it would be flawless, not in spite of me, because of me. I remember leaning back in my office chair that day, high above the city skyline, and closing my eyes for just a moment. Memories surfaced like old bruises me father's dismissive sneers, the snide jokes at holiday dinners, the family photos I'd been cropped out of more than once. At Meredith's wedding, they sat me next to the valet staff. "So I'd feel at home," she'd said with a wink. By then, I owned 9 hotels. No one ever asked how I was doing. No one thought to wonder where the name E. Warren kept appearing in industry publications. They didn't look me up, because in their minds, I hadn't amounted to anything worth noticing. Only my younger sister, Claire, stayed in touch. She didn't know the full extent of my success, she just missed me. And when she called, apologizing quietly because she'd heard Meredith had suggested I shouldn't attend, I reassured her. "Don't be sorry," I said, signing the final approvals for the event. "Actually, could you make sure everyone arrives exactly at 7:00 p.m.? She asked why, and I told her simply, because Meredith's not the only one with connections at the Orlane. Over the following 2 weeks, I worked with my executive team to reconfigure the event subtly but intentionally. I approved new linens, upgraded the wine pairings, and adjusted the lighting schedule for a grand ballroom reveal they wouldn't forget. Marcus, my chief operations manager, checked in with updates. When he asked if I was certain about going through with it all, I didn't hesitate. I thought about what it had taken to get here, the years of silence, the weight of being underestimated, the strength it required to keep going when even your own blood didn't believe in you, and I said, absolutely. Because sometimes, the best way to reclaim your story is not through confrontation or revenge that burns, but through a spotlight you no longer have to ask for. They were coming to the Orlane thinking they were gathering in their usual circle of prestige and privilege. But what they didn't know was this time, the circle had moved. And I was at the center of it. The night of the reunion arrived, cloaked in the kind of quiet opulence that only the Orlane Grand could offer. Polished marble floors that caught the light like water, crystal chandeliers casting soft golden halos over curated floral displays, and subtle ocean air notes woven into the ventilation, creating the illusion of a sea breeze even from the ballroom. I stood alone for a moment in the upper gallery, overlooking the main atrium, watching as guests began to arrive, heels clicking confidently, cufflinks gleaming, laughter forced and too loud. It was a performance they had rehearsed their entire lives, but this time, they didn't know the stage belonged to me. Claire had done exactly as I asked. By 6:45 p.m., the entire family had assembled, uncles and aunts dressed to impress, cousins draped in designer brands, and Meredith, of course, made her grand entrance in a crimson silk gown, gesturing as if she were managing the venue herself. She posed in front of the centerpiece, giving last-minute instructions to staff she didn't know were mine, and when I saw her adjusting the placement of the welcome signage with an air of ownership, I felt something shift, not bitterness, but a calm sense of arrival. My assistant Marcus stood beside me, tablet in hand, giving a subtle nod as the final cue was cleared. "Everything's ready," he said, his voice low. "New signage goes live at 7:15. Just say the word." I looked down at the ballroom. The very space I had designed to bring people together and for years had been excluded from myself, and I told him, "Let them get comfortable. This isn't just a reveal, it's closure." At precisely 7:10 m, the hotel manager approached Meredith with practiced professionalism. "Ms. Westbrook, I'm afraid there's been a slight adjustment to your reservation," he began. Her expression faltered. "That's not possible," she said, her voice already sharp. "I spoke with corporate personally. The event was confirmed weeks ago." The manager nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am. However, the owner had some specific instructions for tonight's gathering." She gave a dismissive laugh, waving him off as though he were a waiter. "I highly doubt the owner of this place has time for family reunion logistics." And that was when I stepped forward. I didn't need a spotlight or a dramatic entrance. I simply walked out from behind the side curtain near the ballroom stage, heels echoing against the marble, posture steady, gaze direct. The room turned with the kind of synchronized curiosity that only happens when something completely unexpected breaks the pattern. There were murmurs. Someone near the fountain dropped a fork. My father's voice cracked the silence like a whip. "Elena," he said, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Before Meredith could intercept with one of her cutting remarks, I spoke calmly, with the weight of 1,000 unsaid things anchoring every word. She told me I couldn't afford to be here, that I didn't belong, that I'd embarrass the family. The tension rose like static, subtle but suffocating. "I'm afraid," Meredith snapped, stepping forward. "This is a private event. Security." "You won't need them," I said, not unkindly, but with the confidence of someone who has nothing left to prove. Marcus tapped his tablet. The massive LED screen behind the stage lit up, first with the elegant logo of the Orlane Grand and then in bold, unmistakable lettering. "Owned and operated by E. Warren Founder, CEO, Warren Hospitality Group." A collective inhale swept through the ballroom. Glasses stilled in midair. Meredith's champagne flute slipped from her hand, crashing into the floor like a punctuation mark none of them had anticipated. "That's not possible," she said, blinking, but her voice lacked conviction. I smiled gently and opened the leather case in my hand. "Would you like to see my business card? Or perhaps the original deed to the property? I keep both, just in case." My father stepped forward then, the man who once told me that no daughter of his would ever work below the Westbrook standard. His voice was quieter this time. "You own this place?" "I do." "And 20 other properties across 5 countries?" I said. "But this one is special. This is where it all began back when you said I was throwing my life away, changing bed linens and cleaning bathrooms." I turned to the rest of the family, many of whom stood frozen, unable to match the woman in front of them with the girl they had once dismissed. "You looked down on me," I said, not with anger, but with truth. "But not once did you look close enough to see who I was becoming." Marcus stepped forward, handing out slim navy folders to key family members. "These contain the story behind Warren Hospitality," he explained, "and the invoice for tonight's event." Meredith grabbed hers, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. "This is nearly double the standard." 40% above market, I clarified. "We have a special surcharge for reunions with complicated histories." Claire let out a sudden laugh, full and unfiltered, and for a moment others joined in, not unkindly, but with the kind of release that comes when the unspoken finally rises to the surface. My father remained quiet, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he asked. "Would you have believed me?" I replied, holding his gaze. He said nothing, but the silence said enough. 15 years ago, I was told I'd never make it in the hospitality world, that no daughter of this family should ever wear a name tag. They were right about one thing. I don't wear one, I print them. Every screen around the ballroom began to display panoramic images of our property's overwater villas in Bora Bora, mountaintop lodges in Switzerland, glass-walled towers in Dubai, and rainforest retreats in Costa Rica. The room had nothing left to say. "You're all welcome to stay," I said smoothly. "In fact, I've arranged a private tour of the property. I think it's time you experienced what a career in customer service actually looks like." Meredith opened her mouth to protest, but I continued. "Oh, hand Meredith. Due to a last-minute celebrity booking, we had to make a room adjustment. You've been placed in one of our standard queen suites, the same type you once joked I was qualified to clean." Her face flushed a deep, unmissable red. As the family followed the staff toward their upgraded room, some stunned, others' sheepish eye lingered behind, and my father hesitated at the edge of the ballroom. "I was wrong," he said, quieter than I had ever heard him. "About everything." I studied him not with resentment, but with perspective. "Do you want to know the best part of owning 21 hotels?" I asked. He looked up. "What's that?" "There are 21 presidential suites. You can pick anyone to stay in, while you figure out how to make things right." A flicker of something passed between us, regret, perhaps, or maybe the first thread of understanding. Later that night, as the skyline glittered beyond my penthouse windows, Marcus brought me a final report. "The numbers are in," he said. "The family seems humbled." I smiled, remembering Meredith's stunned silence, my father's soft apology, the look on every face when the truth finally landed. "It's amazing," I said, "what a little perspective and a room without a view can do." He asked if I wanted to tell them about our next acquisitions in Paris and Tokyo. "Not yet," I replied. "Let's leave something for next year's reunion." Because every great hotelier knows repeat guests are the best kind. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you don't belong, remember, you don't need revenge that screams. You need a life that shines so brightly it can't be denied. Subscribe for more stories like this of strength, second chances, and quiet triumphs. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done if you were standing in that ballroom? Because your story matters too.